reporters.
So thank you very much. So I just want to say we're going down to Florida. We have a big event tomorrow night, a big MAGA event, Make America Great Again. And it's setting records, and otherwise I'd rather be right now at the White House. But we're doing the big event tomorrow night. We had some big news this week, as you know, because Apple is investing $500 billion. Think of that. And that's going to be a lot. It's going to be a tremendous investment. I guess the biggest investment anybody's ever made in the country at one time. But they're going to be investing a lot of money, $500 billion. We have many other companies have just announced they're coming in. A lot of it's because of how we're doing. We've done a great turnaround in a little more than 30 days, but the country's really doing well. Really doing well. We're respected again all over the world. If you look, we had the Japanese Prime Minister. We had the Prime Minister yesterday of UK, as you know. We had the Prime Minister of India. We have another 20 Prime Ministers and Presidents wanting to come. And very good feeling. I think our country has really turned around. We had a meeting today, as you know, with President Zelenskyy, and I would say it didn't work out exactly great from his standpoint. I think he very much overplayed his hand. We're looking for peace. We're not looking for somebody that's going to sign up a strong power and then not make peace because they feel emboldened, and that's what I saw happening. I'm looking for peace. We're not looking to go into a 10-year war and play games. We want peace. And it was just my impression that if we do that, if we sign up, he's looking for something that I'm not looking for. He's looking to go on and fight. We're looking to end the death. 2,000 people died this week. Soldiers, more than that, but 2,000 approximately people died this week. Young Ukrainians and Russians. And somebody would say, why do you care about Ukraine and Russian soldiers? I care about them. I care about everybody. And we're not doing that. Now, if we don't do anything, he's going to have to make peace, but he's dealing with a very weak set of cards. If we sign, he's dealing with a very strong set of cards, and then he doesn't want to make peace. So that's where we are. It's very simple. I'm not looking to get into anything protracted. I want immediate peace. President Putin is going to want to make, and he wants to end it. And you saw what I saw today. This is a man that wants to get us signed up and keep fighting, and we're not doing that. Not for this country. So we're setting a lot of records. Economically, we're setting records, and I think every way we're setting records. One of the best is the right track, wrong track. You saw that. We're on the right track for the first time in over 27 years. People are impressed with that. The other thing is the feeling about our country. The feeling is great. It's up 48% on feeling on business. And that's the record we've never had. There's never been a record where we've ever gone up that much in such a short period of time. So we're doing really well. And I guess some of you are coming with us, and if you are, I hope you're going to have a good flight. What? He's got to say, I want to make peace. He doesn't have to stand there and say about Putin this, Putin that, all negative things. He's got to say, I want to make peace. I don't want to fight a war any longer. His people are dying. He doesn't have the cards, just so you understand it, okay? I could tell you.
Did you tell Zelenskyy to leave the White House?
I don't have to tell you that. Go ahead. I think you know the answer to it. What? Wait. Look, I don't trust or distrust anybody. I just want to get a deal done. And if the deal happens, good. But you can't embolden somebody that does not have the cards, and all of a sudden that person says, oh, well, now I can keep fighting. We're not going to keep fighting. You're going to get the war done, or let them go and see what happens. Let them fight it out. I want anybody that's going to make peace If he's capable of making peace, which he may or may not be, but I want somebody that's going to make peace. Again, he doesn't have the cards. When we sign up, he's got all of the cards. That doesn't mean he can fight. He's got to stop the fighting, stop the death. He's losing hundreds of thousands of soldiers. It's time to stop the death. Say it? Well, he says he wants it now. He wants to come back right now, but I can't do that.
Do you want immediate ceasefire? Do you want immediate ceasefire?
They should have an immediate ceasefire. That was the other thing he didn't want to do about ceasefire. A ceasefire could take place immediately. A contract, if you want to end the war, you sign up an agreement. That's going to take a period of time. It takes time. I want it to end immediately. And I think if you had a ceasefire, it would be a ceasefire, a real one, that would end it. But he doesn't want to do that. That's fine. Do a better deal. I want it to end immediately. I want a ceasefire now. He says, oh, I don't want a ceasefire. Well, all of a sudden, he's a big shot because he has the U.S. on his side. Either we're going to end it or let him fight it out. And if he fights it out, it's not going to be pretty. Because without us, he doesn't win. Let me tell you. It doesn't matter what I'm considering. I'm just telling you. You saw what I saw today. That was not a man that wanted to make peace. And I'm only interested if he wants to end the bloodshed. Thank you very much.
That was President Trump on the South Lawn of the White House after what can only be described as a contentious meeting in the Oval Office with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. He said Zelenskyy, you just heard him, overplayed his hand and is dealing with a weak set of cards. The president said repeatedly he wants Zelenskyy to stop the fighting, to end the war. It's worth noting, for history's sake, that Ukraine is not the aggressor in this. And if the war were to end, Russia would have a lot to say about that. It could stop bombing, sending missiles and other munitions and soldiers into Ukraine. It could stop the war instantly. As all this has gone on for the last couple of weeks, the Russians have done quite the opposite, accelerating and intensifying missiles, bombs, and fighting in the battle space in eastern Ukraine. I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Nancy Cordes, alongside our political panel. Chuck Rocha, who, as you might well remember, formerly served as senior advisor on Senator Bernie Sanders' 2016 and 2020 presidential campaigns, and Danielle Alvarez, senior advisor on President Trump's 2024 campaign. It's great to have all of you with us. Nancy, you were just out there on the South Lawn, is that right?
I was, and I asked President Trump what Zelenskyy would need to do to restart talks after things went so disastrously off the rails today. And what President Trump just said, you played it out there, is he's got to say, I want to make peace. He can't stand there and say Putin this, Putin that, all negative things. He has to say, I don't want to fight a war any longer. He doesn't have the cards. President Trump, and again in that Q&A with reporters, said that he wants a ceasefire immediately. He wants to end the war immediately. And he seemed to be suggesting that Zelenskyy is holding out for things that he thinks would drag peace talks out too long, and also that he thinks Zelenskyy doesn't have the leverage to ask for. So basically, he seemed to be suggesting Zelensky's got to take what he can get from me, or I'm not interested in restarting talks.
Danielle Alvarez, your assessment of this day and where relations stand between the U.S. and Ukraine.
Here's what I'll say, and I've been fortunate to be in the room with President Trump, as you know, seeing him being fierce and relentless in negotiations. He's going to do what is best for the American people, and he's going to do what he promised on the campaign trail, and that is bring peace through strength. What you heard him say on the South Lawn was exactly that. What he wants to make sure is that both nations can come to the table, and it's hard to bring both to the table when each is the aggressor of the other. Of course, Russia being the initial aggressor of Ukraine, but Ukraine also has to want to strike a deal, cannot make a deal and have an ally with America and the American people only to bring us to war. We know that the American people don't want that. They don't want to continue to spend billions of taxpayer dollars not only on an endless war, but on a war between other nations.
Danielle, do you think it matters to President Trump or the White House that immediately after this confrontation with Zelenskyy, prominent members of the Russian government began to applaud the president and call Zelenskyy, among other things, an insolent pig who got slapped down? I mean, to have immediate Kremlin applause for an American president dealing with a situation like that, do you think that lands well with the president or his senior advisors?
I think that the president, again, is focused on what is best for America. He is trying to bring both parties to the table, and both parties have to want to get to peace, have to want to end this war. And what we can't have is President Zelenskyy entering the White House, entering the West Wing, sitting in the Oval Office, trying to use the American media to promote his propaganda and trying to bring America into this fight and bring it into war when, again, the deal is very clear. President Trump will get involved and will deliver peace should both nations want to reach that agreement.
Very quickly, Danielle, what was propagandistic about what Zelenskyy said?
He wanted to rehash everything that has happened, and what we need to do is move forward. President Trump, again, has said that he will not continue to support chaos abroad. He will not continue to support war. And the same way that he was able to strike a deal between Israel and Hamas and a ceasefire, he is very focused on making sure that the same can be accomplished between Russia and Ukraine. He said it on the campaign trail. He has not wavered from his commitment, and that is to stop the loss of lives. And in order to do that, America is going to make sure that everyone can have a seat at the table and is going to make sure that the end result is peace, and President Trump will not waver from that.
Chuck, your thoughts?
Contentious. Contentious is an understatement. Where I come from, anybody gets that loud and that close to you, normally there's some furniture moving around. Let me just say this. The only one who won today was a dictator in Russia. We have to support the folks that are our friends. That's why they're called allies. Do we need to give every bit of dollars that we have to every foreign country? I could not disagree with what's being said on the internet right now. There's a way to be an adult. And if you watch today, if you go back and watch that again, watch J.D. Vance. This thing was almost over. We were going to get something done. And then he was like, no. I want to go in and poke the bears and blow this whole thing up. And he did exactly what he wanted to. And then we went on this rampage. Things are really tough when you have folks coming after each other. But there's a way through history to act like a president, act like you're in head of this country, and make sure you're not putting America lives. I want to fight the Russians over there. I don't want to fight the Russians right here.
Do you think when President Zelenskyy said the United States might feel threatened by Russia in the future, and President Trump jumped in and said, don't tell us what we're going to feel, that there was something about what Zelenskyy said that bruised President Trump's sense of America First ego?
For sure.
Chuck.
Donald Trump ain't never been in a fight in his whole life. And when you poke at a bully, it makes him upset. And that's exactly what he did, because he said the same thing that a lot of folks have said all around the national security apparatus. Is sure, there's an ocean there. That's why we want to fight the war on the other side of it.
Nancy Cordes, Chuck Rocha, and Danielle Alvarez, thank you very, very much.